turning off the tarmac onto this gravel road was one of the most terrifying moments, because there's such long distances between places that you can refill water and get some shade and stock up on supplies. And often there's very, very few cars that pass by. And so often you're just out there by yourself. You have this sandy gravel road. There's no left side or right side of the road. You just go wherever is the least sandy part of the road. And it just gets very corrugated, which means you're just bumping up and down the whole time and just having to work so hard even to go 10 kilometers an hour. And when you've had to load up sort of 12, 15 liters of water and 5 days worth of food as sort of rations, and your bike weighs over 60 kilograms, that was super, super hard work.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello listeners, and welcome to Seek Travel Ride. I'm your host Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to be bringing you part 2 of our special episode with Rob MacLennan. Now, if you haven't yet listened to part 1, I highly recommend going back and checking it out first to catch up on Rob's adventure. I've provided a link in the show notes here so you can get to it nice and easily. Now, in part 1, we heard about how Rob prepared himself for this bike journey from the UK to Cape Town. Something he confesses he took on as a total novice, having no prior experience of bike travel beforehand. He shared his experiences crossing through Europe, then over to Africa, battling sickness in Morocco, pushing his limits in the Sahara, and then his observations as he made his way through West Africa. Rob raved about the coffee culture in Guinea. He enjoyed his time spent in small villages, observing daily life at small food stalls. We ended that episode with Rob sharing his harrowing story of being held at gunpoint by local militia while in Nigeria. It really was truly a life or death situation, and that's where we're going to be picking the conversation back up from now. In part 2, Rob's continuing on this story, leaving Nigeria behind him and pushing on all the way to Cape Town. We're going to be hearing about sketchy border crossings, his experience of misadventure getting lost in the jungle in Congo, amazing moments of connection with strangers in Angola, as well as truly memorable experiences and the challenge of crossing the Namib desert before making his way finally to his endpoint of Cape Town, South Africa. For me, a true highlight of this second episode are the insights Rob's going to be sharing in relation to mental health, post-adventure blues, and the power of perspective. I'm super excited to be bringing you part 2. Let's jump into the conversation with Rob. Again, we're going to be picking it up where we left off at that border crossing from Nigeria to Cameroon. Because actually, was it Nigeria and crossing back into Cameroon where you couldn't get your Cameroon visa because the printer was broken?
Yeah, this was such a whimsical moment. This was literally 2 days later, and I got to the end and and I can't swear on this podcast, but I was like, I'm just so done with this country. And I had my Cameroon e-visa, and I just thought I sort of had my transport. You have to get like a speedboat across the two countries, which in itself is...
It's crazy.
Crazy, absolutely crazy. But I found out that I had to get the visa sticker from the Cameroon consulate in this port in Calabar before I could leave the country to go to Cameroon, even though I already had the visa. And so I raced to try and get to the embassy before it closed on the Friday. And I got there and it had shut early because they decided that no one was going to come. And then it was a long weekend for New Year's. And I was stuck in this port, feeling pretty miserable. None of the ATMs had any money in. You can't use any foreign cards in Nigeria. So I was surviving on about a total of $30 for like 4 days. And I was, staying in a $6 a night hotel room and trying to sort of ration my $2 a day of food allowance to try and sort of just make it work out, because I just had no access to cash. There were loads of banks and loads of ATMs, but none of them had any money in them, and it's impossible to use a foreign card and get cash out in any other way. So that was its own nightmare. I then spent New Year's in this town, which was a bizarre experience, by myself, obviously still processing what had happened, just not really wanting to be there. And I saw that they had like these fireworks that had been advertised. And so I went to the place that there were going to be these fireworks. I'd gone to this sort of New Year's service leading up to midnight, which is what sort of everyone does, and had a sort of crazy experience in this church with like 40, 50 people like up on the stage, just like going crazy. And I was like, yeah, like, come on, this is awesome. And I went to go and find these fireworks, and they just hadn't really advertised it. So there were a load of camera people and sort of TV networks there, but maybe only about 20 locals. And obviously, as the only foreigner there, they all sort of were like, oh, this is something that we can use. So I watched these fireworks, and then sort of had like sort of 6 microphones shoved in my face, and just being asked like by these reporters like, oh, like, how does it feel to be here in Calabar for New Year? And like, obviously, like, I just had like the most terrifying ordeal of my entire life.
Yeah.
2 days before. But I was had to be like, oh, like, this is, it's so special to be here, and I just feel like so grateful. But just in the meanwhile, there's just like some guy doing donuts in the road behind me, just screeching around. It was just a really, really surreal experience. Anyway, I then get to the Cameroon consulate, almost completely out of cash, and I'm just like, this just needs to work out. And I get there and I sit there for a whole day, and they say, sorry, the printer is broken. Come back in 2 weeks. And I was just like, I've not got 2 weeks. Like this, there's just no way that I can do this. And I was panicking. I was looking at all sorts of options. I was looking at trying to like fly back to Ivory Coast and fly to Cameroon, and then get my bike sort of taken across in a boat to the border and all this stuff. And anyway, like, thankfully, I waited out 48 hours, and then, praise the Lord, I just got a text from the consulate saying, oh, the printer started working, you can come and get your visa. A broken printer almost completely derailed my trip, which would have been quite something after everything that has sort of happened leading up to that point.
There's so many amusing things that have come out of this. You know, when you're talking about the seriousness of being held at gunpoint, like the moment where, what can you give me at the end? Oh, do you want money? I don't want your money. Well, here, have this packet of sweets. Like, that's a crazy moment.
Yeah.
And then the fact that your way of getting out of there, and you're stifled by a printer, computer says no. Like,
so many crazy moments like that, just that you just think like you couldn't write this. You have to laugh. Obviously, at the time it's immensely frustrating, but it's just, this is just these things happen. It was such a crazy experience also crossing the border, because so the Gulf of Guinea, which is where this border crossing is one of the most dangerous sort of seas in the world. There's a lot of pirating there, and so you sort of get on this speedboat from this tiny little sort of port, and the engine's broken, and they spend ages trying to fix it. Eventually, you leave. You've bought a rubber ring for £2 that is sort of going to be there to look after you in case you capsize, and you're sort of sitting on top of whatever goods they've stacked up into the speedboat with sort of 15 other people. It was just me and this Italian guy, and then a bunch of Nigerians and Cameroonians, and then we had to sort of hop from military boat to military boat who were guarding the river mouth, and go with our hands up so we didn't have any guns, and then they would like check everyone's passports and everything, and like ask for bribes, and it was just like such an intense and long experience before finally getting to Cameroon. So yeah, like, it was just one of those crazy experiences that I was just like there with my bike sort of on a speedboat, just thinking like, how did I end up in this situation?
I don't know. Like, I'm talking to you months now after that happened. Like, do you ever still go back to that and go, that was wild? Because it was.
Yeah, all the time.
Absolutely mental.
I just randomly get reminded of certain crazy experiences and just think, wow, like that was so wild.
Actually, I don't know necessarily crazy is what I'd describe it. I was sort of amused when I came upon it. It was when you were in Congo and you wanted to take a shortcut, which was anything but. I think you ended up crossing through the jungle or trying to.
Yeah.
I often,
Yeah.
Rob, ask people to tell me about one day of their trip, and I appreciate you've told me about some amazing days, but I want you to tell me about this day and that shortcut. Take me and the listeners there and tell me all about the shortcut in the Congo.
Yeah. So this day was a really crazy day. I'd had such a funny experience the night before where I was finding somewhere to stay and I found this cute little sort of village of like 100 people down at this river, and they were very welcoming and showed me where I could wash and set up my tent. And the chief of the village said, "Oh, do you want chicken to eat?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." And he just picks up a chicken from the ground next to him and says, "Is this one okay?"
Oh, gosh.
And I was just so taken aback. I was like, "Yeah, that looks great." And then lo and behold, 2 hours later, chicken is defeathered and grilled up, and I just sat in this tiny village in the middle of the jungle eating a chicken that was alive 2 hours earlier, just thinking like, wow, this is crazy. But yeah, that was real free range, fresh produce. But anyway, I got up from this and I was like just excited to keep going. I was in a bit of a tricky situation in Congo because I got my visa in Benin before I realized I was going to struggle to get into Nigeria. And so I only got into the country 2 weeks after I thought I was going to get there. And I only had a very short visa. And so I had, I think, something like 18 days to do like over 2,000 kilometers across Congo. And I was like, I just can't afford for anything to go wrong. So I was just plowing on and and then I looked in Google Maps and I'm on this one tarmac road that goes from Yaoundé, which is the capital of Cameroon, down to Brazzaville, the capital of Congo. And I see this shortcut that on Google Maps looks like a sort of pretty serious road. And I'm like, this is going to save me like 100K. Like I'm 100, yeah, got to take this road. Anyway, I sort of get to the junction and it doesn't seem to be a road. And I sort of have a little look in the bushes and find a little motorbike track. I'm like, okay, let's give this a go. Anyway, I just thought, you know what? I'm just going to just commit to this shortcut and try and get across. Anyway, I'm sort of going through increasingly dense jungle across all these little rivers on like sort of planks that are rotting and sort of having to like walk on one small log while sort of balancing my fully loaded bike on another log and just hoping that it doesn't collapse under my feet. And then sort of going through these very remote villages and the track gets smaller and smaller, and it eventually gets to a point about, I think, 20 kilometers in where I'm barely making any forward progress. And I'm in this really, I get to a little village and I say, is it possible to keep going? And they say, yeah, it's possible to keep going. You might want a knife just to cut through the trees. Anyway, I sort of get a bit further on and then find myself in this jungle, and it's just completely flooded and I have absolutely no idea where the track is. And I just think like, how on earth is this like meant to be like a main route? So at that point I just have to give up and turn around and retrace my steps and eventually make it back to the main road just as the sun's starting to set. Yeah, find somewhere to sleep next to the road at a junction. And yeah, for like something like the 6th or 7th day in a row, I've just been craving rice. Like I'm burning like 6,000 calories a day, and all I want is a big bowl of rice. And every day in like going through the sort of northern jungle in Congo, I can't find rice. It's just manioc, which is like this sort of cassava that's sort of pulped up into a sort of rubbery stick, which is not the most appetizing. And then you either have sort of bony small fish, or if you're lucky, sort of grilled chicken. So I had a lot of chicken and just sort of slightly stale bread that you could find in the sort of small corner stores. And yeah, once again, get to this place, get a beer, find some guys to hang out with, chat about my day, play some cards, and then look for some food. Can't find any rice. Chicken and bread it is again for the 7th day in a row. And then the next morning, I remember cycling off and about 20k later, I get to a little junction, and there's a lady with a big bowl of rice and beans. And I screech to a halt and just get off and order a bowl of rice and beans. And just that, I almost cried with happiness. I almost cried with happiness, just how good that felt. And, people talk about like Michelin restaurants and stuff. Like, just try a bowl of rice and beans after a week in the jungle. That stuff is different. That stuff is different. Yeah, and like that's what I mean about like maybe I have a warped perception of how amazing the food was in these places, but that day was an absolute. That was the same day I found melon milk for the first time.
That's like magic.
Crazy, absolutely magic. But yeah, one of the biggest life lessons I've learned is that rice is the best carb. When you're really really desperate, that's the stuff.
Have you actually just made yourself a bowl of rice and beans when you got back home ever?
Yeah, sometimes I just eat plain rice. It's great.
Oh, when we were talking earlier about, going on these journeys, it strips life back to simplicity and what you really need. And little did you know that the life lesson you were going to give yourself was that plain rice is great.
Yeah, and just like appreciating like a warm shower. I went about 3 months without. I think there's a holy trinity in the bathroom. There's the sink, there's the toilet, and there's the shower. And sort of even beyond that is the warm water. And in these sort of guest houses and hotels, like you're very lucky if you get two of the three in the Trinity. You're not quite sure what you're going to get, but you can probably get a basin or a toilet. And often you'll just have like a bucket of water that is both you have to like wash yourself with, but also wash the toilet, like flush the toilet with. Obviously, once you've had a whole day of like just being covered in sweat and grime and dirt from the road, even just just washing yourself in a bucket of cold water is pretty great. But yeah, I remember my first warm shower in like 3 months in this Catholic sort of nunnery in Cameroon, and it was just this most incredible feeling of standing under a shower of running water that was warm, and like I was like, just this is the life, Like the fact you can turn the tap on and there's warm water, like that is something I will never not be grateful for. Those small things that just are so great that you just don't appreciate until they're taken away from you.
That's an absolute life lesson that you learn there in Africa. I've heard it from a few guests, is water is so precious. I remember actually my husband travelled in Africa many years ago, and he said the one thing that always stayed with him when he came back to Australia was the idea of why do we waste water washing cars? And I think it takes actually seeing that type of, like you must appreciate those little life luxuries. To call water as a luxury is hard for us to fathom if we've never been to that other end of the extreme. But to feel clean is such a gift, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think like that's something that I still have to like remind myself, is that the fact that I can turn the tap on and be able to drink the water safely and have a shower or bath whenever I want is like such an amazing sort of facility to have. That so many people, that's just not a reality at all. And just having like good sanitation and just access to sort of clean and hygienic spaces is like the default, is something that we just don't even think about. I think a lot of the time.
There were things when I was researching about you, actually, Rob, that really struck me. And we've spoken about this a few times already during the show in different ways, but just you've really had a proper immersion into African, people's day-to-day life. There was a video I came across, I think it was actually while you were in Benin, and it was a string of people hauling in the fishing nets of the morning catch. And I looked at it and thought, what's going on here? And then you sort of described the fact that everyone in the village is hauling in the same one net and it's all shared all around. And that's just how it works there. They're the sort of moments, again, that you can't expect that you're going to get yourself when you set out on this sort of journey. But if I was to ask you, can you tell me about just something else, about pure, proper African way of life that you were able to observe because you weren't in a safari bus, because you weren't in the tourist trail, because you weren't in the quote-unquote safe areas of Africa?
Yeah, no, you make a really sort of great observation there. And I think I really went into this trying to sort of in a as culturally sensitive as a way as possible to try and immerse myself in the environment and the culture that I was in, and try and sort of interact with the locals as much as possible and not sort of hide myself away. And I really wanted to engage with people and with the places I were in as much as possible. I think like one experience that comes to mind that was really, yeah, like really had an impact on me was, I think it was my second day in Guinea, actually, back to Guinea. And I hadn't got as far as I was hoping. I hadn't anticipated how tricky the roads would be. And it was getting dark, and I found myself in a field, spent ages trying to pitch my tent, couldn't pitch my tent, and I was like, I can't, I have to find somewhere to sleep because I can't just really sleep out here. I don't feel safe, and I'm going to get bitten by mosquitoes, and I just know that this is like prime feeding period. Anyway, I keep cycling another 5k through the dark to the next village, and I just sort of, yeah, fine. I'm like, okay, I'll just see if there's someone here that I can ask if there's somewhere to stay. And I go into a little roadside stall and get a big bowl of rice and fish and get chatting to this guy sat next to me. And this guy, he's called Abubakar, and we're chatting in French and doing our best to communicate with each other. And I just asked him, like, is there anywhere in this town that I can stay? And he said, no, there's nowhere you can stay, but you can come and stay with me if you want. And I was like, just like, wow, that'll be amazing. Thank you so much. And this guy, like, I literally had maybe like 3 minute conversation with before asking this question. And just like that, with no hesitation, he was like, oh yeah, I've got space. Come and stay with me. So we finish our food and sort of walk into the village and go to his hut, and he sort of pulls back this corrugated iron that acts as a door, and he's got his bed, and then there's like a sort of maybe 2 meters squared of floor space next to it. And he was like, oh, do you want to, like, sleep in the bed next to me, or do you want to sleep on the floor? I'm like, oh, I'll just put my mat on the floor and put my bike there and sleep there. And I was just so overwhelmed, like, with that sort of just immediate and sort of questioning sort of generosity. And yeah, we get set up, and he was like, okay, do you want to go and watch the football? And we we go and go to the hut in the village that's the sort of football cafe, and just get a little coffee and sit on a bench. And right in remote Guinea, we're watching like live Champions League football and watching like Real Madrid play. And this was actually something that was just incredible, was like, even in the most remote villages where only like maybe one hut had a generator with electricity, you could still find some way to watch football, and there'd be like a chalkboard with the matches for the day. And I think that's like, football and the Coca-Cola company are like the two things that have just gone beyond anything else in reaching the most remote parts of Africa. And it was, yeah, that was just so cool to be sat with this guy I just met, who was giving me his 2 square meters of floor space to have somewhere to stay when I couldn't find anywhere to pitch my tent, and just sitting there with his guys, his friends, and chatting to them, and finding just like a village drop toilet to go and do that in. And yeah, and then just like wake up, and we're chatting, and he's talking about his life as just, he's just like a gold miner in this sort of very dangerous industry. And we just go and like get some puff donuts and coffee, and like I have to pay for his food, and he's just like so grateful. And I just, yeah, like being able to like actually spend the night with this complete stranger in a hut in a village in a very remote place was really eye-opening, and just like another like level of like, this is appreciation of humanity that you just would not expect from people in the Western world. And like I guess, yeah, I think that was such a cool experience. And yeah, the football thing is definitely one that was amazing. Like, one thing that you can always start a conversation with anyone is asking them what football team they support, no matter how good or bad their English or French is.
I have to ask you who you support now.
So I'm an Aston Villa fan, which I don't really come from a family of football supporters. And for a bit, I used to support Chelsea as a kid because my friend did, and I was like, okay, yeah, and that cool. And then in the last few years, I was sort of thinking like, oh, is there actually any reason I do this, or is it completely arbitrary? Anyway, like I was thinking about what's the only team that had ever like really done anything for me was Aston Villa. Like I lived in Birmingham in primary school, like after moving back from Malawi. and sort of Aston Villa did like a sort of outreach program, and like me and my primary school class went to Villa Park and recorded like a fitness video and learned to like chop vegetables and stuff. And I was like, you know what, this is worthy of my fandom. So yeah, shout out to Aston Villa Football Club kitchen staff.
Not a bad club to support.
Yeah, but it was so interesting going through and seeing which clubs were sort of the dominant ones that were supported in different countries and different areas and with different demographics. I think it was super interesting that the older generations in particular were sort of Man United and Arsenal fans, and often young people sort of 20 and below were often like Manchester City fans. And it's just interesting to see the sort of almost like a tendency to support the teams that are doing really well in Premier League or Europe when you're sort of forming. And I think it's so interesting that there all these clubs just have absolutely no idea like how many people in these remote villages they haven't even thought of are like, you know, cheering them on. And there's something so fascinating about that. Another really cool moment sort of related to that was I was in Central and West Africa while the Africa Cup of Nations was happening.
Oh, wow. Huge.
Which is really huge. And it was just so cool as I was going through seeing like how excited everyone was about it and about their country. And my first day in Angola, I just managed to get in across the border before the day before my Congo visa expired. And it was in a sort of northern province called Cabinda that is generally like very few foreigners go to because it's sort of marked as unsafe just because of like some historical kidnappings basically. And I remember like cycling down through this jungle in these hills that had rivers out of nowhere, just being like, this is epic and like no one else knows about this. And I was just got absolutely drenched in this downpour. And I get to a village and it's just everyone's going absolutely crazy. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I realized that it's the last 16 match between Angola and Namibia.
Oh my gosh, neighbouring rivals, right?
Yeah, neighbouring rivals. And it's like I think it's the first time that either of those countries have got to the knockout stages. So it was super exciting for both of them. Anyway, I'm in Angola, like people are going crazy. It's the most intense downpour I've ever experienced. I'm like a sodden drowned rat. The roads are like rivers. I managed to find like a sort of hotel in this village where I can stay, and there's all these people sort of watching the football on the screen. And I just find myself like sat at a table with these guys, and like they don't speak any English, I don't speak any Portuguese, and so I had almost zero words in common, but we're there watching the football and just having a great time watching Angola win. And that was just such a cool and like exciting moment. I just like, it was so cool to like feel a part of that in such a isolated place that almost no foreigners ever go to.
It's almost like this year you've got to tune into African Cup of Nations just to take you back there again.
Always. Always going to be following.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, because whichever game you watch, particularly if it's countries that you've travelled through, it'll also trigger back memories. I think that's the cool thing as well. But, you know, if you're watching football on TV, you'll think of watching it in that shack with, was it Abubakar?
Yeah, Abubakar, yeah.
They're the sort of genuine experiences that you've got, because you can definitely now go on tours which take you, and whether you're on a bike or not, but which will plant you somewhere to have an experience of an African village or something like that. But they're not real, proper, genuine encounters, are they? They're an insight into it. And it's a hard question too with the tourism trade, because there's, on one hand, it feels like it's exploitation. On the other hand, there's I don't know. There's This is important to give like appreciation for marginalized cultures. Yeah.
Without trying to sort of exploit them. Yeah, 100%. That's definitely a tension that's there, and you know, I don't know what the right balance or approach is, but
all is to say, Rob, you know, those encounters you had, they're so genuine. They're not the ones that you could plan out. You're planning a journey down through Africa. You're not planning to spend a night sleeping in a small shack on, 2 meters of floor space and then watching the Champions League on TV powered by a generator, or cheering on, teams with people you can't speak the language to, and just seeing that. They're awesome experiences.
100%. I had another really, really sort of awesome encounter when I was sort of deep in the desert in Mauritania, sort of really far from it was sort of this 400-kilometer stretch between two villages, and it's one of the hottest days that I've had, probably the hottest day I had in the Sahara. I stopped to take a picture of this camel, and the camel driver, I guess, is the translation from French, but the Berber camel driver, who was just in his little tent that he'd put up, sort of beckoned me over, and I went over, and he was like, just sort of beckoned for me to go and sit with him, and he gave me bread and camel milk and camel meat, and we sort of tried to talk about, about various things, and I was asking about his life, and this is just a guy who lives in the desert, and his job is to look after his camels, and yeah, it was just really epic to just sit and spend time with someone in his space and be invited in and to drink green tea and eat bread and meat, and he sort of showed me his camels and this newborn baby camel, and
Oh my gosh, cuteness overload.
yeah, so cute. That was a really, really, I was like, I think about my first like really touching experience where I was sort of invited in by someone into their space, and that was a real privilege to experience that.
Hey there, Seek Travel Ride listeners. I have got some amazing news to share that I think you are going to absolutely love. And that is our 2025 lightweight bikepacking tour is officially open for bookings. Now imagine this. You, me, a group of awesome people pedaling through the breathtaking foothills of the Pyrenees, soaking in the scenery and all the time creating memories that you'll be talking about for years. When designing this tour, I've made sure to put adventure at the heart of it, and it's the perfect adventure for anyone that's curious about bikepacking or looking for an epic trip without the stress. You're not going to need to carry heavy camping gear or cook your own meals, but instead, each day we're going to be exploring stunning landscapes. Every evening, we're going to be kicking back at a comfy hotel. All along the way, we're going to have some seriously delicious French food. You know I love food. How could I design a tour that doesn't incorporate that aspect into it, right? The scenery on this ride is incredible, and I've made sure that the roads that I've incorporated on our route will truly have you mind blown. The best part of this trip? I'm going to be riding right alongside you. Whether you're totally new to bike travel or a seasoned adventurer, this trip is all about fun, exploration, and connecting with like-minded people. Now, spaces are limited because I don't want an overwhelmingly big group. I think keeping it small means that the experiences stay more genuine. So don't wait too long. Head to the link that I've got in the show notes to reserve your spot on this trip. Let's make 2025 the year where you take on a bike adventure. We have so many laughs and enjoy some great rides together. I cannot wait to share this journey with you. All right, now let's get back to the episode. Talking about a baby camel there, it's got me thinking of wildlife. And I know it sounds cliche, but wildlife is a part of Africa. I don't think as big a part throughout all of Africa as potentially a lot of us assume. Like, a lot of us probably wrongly assume that you're going to see big wild African animals everywhere that you go, but there's countries where you're probably not seeing many at all. A country which does seem to have a lot of the wild animals there on display is Namibia, and you definitely had some pretty cool experiences seeing like giraffes, zebra, warthogs, I think, elephants?
Yeah.
What was it like actually seeing these animals for real, not at a zoo?
Yeah, so you make a really good point there of sort of expecting a lot more wildlife than there actually is. And I definitely experienced that. That was one of the things I was really sort of excited about, was seeing what I could see sort of from the road. But the honest realization I had was that actually, because there's so much hunting for bushmeat, especially around settlements and roads, any sensible animal is just going to stay away. And so I didn't actually see that much wildlife sort of outside of national parks, apart from sort of chameleons crossing the road, a few snakes, some birds, the occasional warthogs here and there. So yeah, reaching Namibia, where there was this incredible wildlife, was super special. So when I got to the border, my dad joined me for a week in the north of Namibia, which was really special because that was the first time that I met up with someone that I knew in, I think more than 5 months at that point. And we took a day off to hire a car and drive around Etosha National Park and there was just some incredible wildlife there. We saw like a leopard, we saw lions, saw an elephant right up close, giraffe, zebras, all the stuff. And I'm very lucky that, like, especially as a kid growing up in Malawi, I'd seen some really cool wildlife as a kid. But it's always just so awe-inspiring. What was really great was like continuing to see like more wildlife, like especially the sort of little piggy warthogs sort of running
Pumbaa,
away.
yeah.
Little mini pumbas sort of running around after Mama Pumba is always just such a funny thing to see on the road. And yeah, we stayed in one place where we managed to get really close to a group of rhinos, just sort of walking right up sort of 20 meters away, and that was an incredible experience. But yeah, going further south into Namibia, like right into the desert, I was like, surely the wildlife is going to disappear. But somehow there was just still a lot of like big animals still somehow managing to survive in these sort of really arid sort of parts of the desert.
Yeah, because I've interviewed people who are through the desert, and actually shout out to Vibke Luman. Hi, Vibke, and Julien, who you're traveling with there as well. They're almost through Namibia now. In fact, when this episode goes out, Vibke may actually have reached Cape Town. So huge shout out. But it's something that strikes me when I look through where they are, and you know, when you were talking about that corrugated road and the mountains all around, you know, I remember just seeing Vibka on the road and I was thinking, I wonder if this is the road. But there's no shade in a lot of stretches. Like, there is nowhere to get respite from the searing heat there, either on days on end too. Like, how did you find surviving through those type of elements?
Yeah. I mean, just on the side, yeah, shout out to Vibka. She's epic. We were actually texting today about Namibia. Yeah, I'm so jealous watching her sort of on her travels still. We have sort of been in touch sort of actually really since the start of my journey, because I saw that she was also doing a similar trip. And even though we didn't overlap, like, we've sort of shared a lot of information and stuff together, which has been really cool. But yeah, that week in the desert through Namibia was by a long margin the hardest physical thing I've ever done. From the capital Windhoek, I had to make a decision of either continuing along the tarmac road down to South Africa or taking the gravel road into the desert and crossing that way. And I just thought I wasn't intending to go through the desert, but I met another cyclist a couple of days before. Shout out to Jonah, epic
Hi,
guy.
Jonah.
And Jonah said, you have to go through the desert. It's incredible. And I was like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do it. So I sort of plan my route out, and turning off the tarmac onto this gravel road was one of the most terrifying moments, because there's such long distances between places that you can refill water and get some shade and stock up on supplies. And often there's very, very few cars that pass by. And so often you're just out there by yourself. And you have this sandy gravel road. There's no left side or right side of the road. You just go wherever is the least sandy part of the road. And it just gets very corrugated, which means you're just bumping up and down the whole time and just having to work so hard even to go 10 kilometers an hour. And when you've had to load up sort of 12, 15 liters of water and 5 days worth of food as sort of rations, and your bike weighs over 60 kilograms, that was super, super hard work. And to start with, it's like 2,000 meters elevation, and just there's no shade. And it hit 40 degrees probably about 10 a.m. Every day it hit 45. Some days it hit above 50 degrees for several hours.
That's mental.
Never experienced heat anything like that. And that was one of those moments where I just was like, I just have to keep going. And like days where I was low on water and I just had to get to the next place I could refill, was just a case of just gritting my teeth and pushing through like the physically most challenging and brutal experience that I've ever had to push myself through. And that was really the peak of like just realizing how much more my body is capable, and like anyone's body is capable of than they think. Yeah, there was something so epic about that as well.
Yeah, and you know, at the very, very start of the show, you were saying how it felt like for every section of the trip, it was sort of leveling up all the time. And you know, I was just reflecting back on you saying that, Rob, when you were telling me about crossing Namibia there. And how different that was to your Saharan desert experience, which, you can reflect on now and say that was really easy. But in Namibia, it was like, oh, let's escalate it up to survival rates here, where the only instinct is you've got to keep going because there's no solution going backwards.
Yeah, I really felt that was like the final boss of the trip was that week in the desert in Namibia.
What was it like then having to think about bringing your trip to a close? Because that's got to be pretty hard to battle with. And this is an assumption on me, but you set out on a journey that had to be there was a time frame of 200 days, and also power to you, 199. You had it with a day to spare.
Yeah.
But did you find yourself as you crossed over into South Africa sort of reluctantly making your way to Cape Town?
Yeah, it was a really weird emotional experience that last couple of weeks finishing the trip. As I mentioned before, there was this weird sort of point where I had to start thinking about reaching the end that I had allowed myself to think about leading up to that point. And there was a sort of fear of finishing and almost a fear of having to face the music and go back to normal life and start a new job and move to a new city and just know that life was going to get more complicated. And I guess accompanied with that was this sort of almost like dread that something was going to go wrong right at the last minute. I don't really know where that came from, but I was just feeling this for like a few days leading up to the end, and it was definitely like a sketchy few days. Like the vibe really changed when I crossed from Namibia to South Africa. You could just feel the social tension and problems that they have there with just like a lot of like there's such like unemployment rate, like the social situation is really bad. There's a lot of homelessness and sort of security is much more a risk there. And so I felt that, especially coming from Namibia, that's probably one of the safest countries on the whole trip because nobody lives there. So yeah, like it was a really weird emotional thing coming to the end, especially because it didn't feel like the end of it didn't feel like I was finishing an achievement. The thing that I had set out to do had already happened. It was never about reaching Cape Town. It was about the adventure and the journey and the experiences along the way. And I remember waking up for like the 3 days after I finished, being like, where am I? What time is it? How many hours of daylight have I got left? How far do I have to go? And just having to like tell myself, Rob, you're done now. You don't have to worry about this anymore. And that was a really strange thing to sort of adjust myself to, not just constantly being on the road.
I often wonder, and I've spoken to guests who notice for themselves as they're getting closer to the end point of their particular journey, they're sort of stringing it out, finding ways to make it last longer, reluctantly moving to the end of it all, because I guess it is what you were talking about as well. For them, it's not the end point either. It's the joy of every day and the experiences throughout. That's the reason why they travel. As a novice then, who took this bike adventure, this is the first one you've done, getting to that end point and realising that it was about the journey, although it sounds, Rob, like you sort of had that in your mind from the outset, so it's probably not the right question to ask you, but you know how I said at the start, we were trying to record this probably within a week or two of you finishing, and then that was never going to happen. And I'm really thankful for that because of the benefit of time for you to process what you've been through.
Yeah, definitely.
So having the ability to reflect back on what you've achieved, what have you learnt about yourself and what are you most proud of?
I think the biggest lesson I learned about myself was that I have far more control, and we have far more control over our mental and emotional states than we allow ourselves to think. I definitely realized this I had a lot of really shitty days where I was ill with food poisoning. It was 40 degrees. It was hilly. I had to do like 150K. And I was like, I just don't want to be here. Like I could either choose to allow myself to feel miserable or choose to find joy and choose to be happy. And I most days, especially in that second half of the trip, I said to myself out loud, Rob, get over yourself. This is awesome. You're so lucky to be cycling across Angola right now. Like, how epic is this? And just choosing to say, I choose to feel joy. I choose to take this shitty situation and be positive about it and listen to something that makes me happy. Just think about the people in the back of the truck coming past, like smiling and waving and shouting, and like savoring the moments of joy and making that the narrative and making that the thing that determines my mood. And I think sort of before the trip, I went through sort of really difficult periods with my mental health, and I think sort of feeling this sort of default acceptance that I'm sort of a slave to my subconscious emotions and I don't really have a control over how I feel. But I think being in situations where you have no choice but to get to the end, and if you allow yourself to feel miserable or be scared, then you're just wasting valuable energy. That realization that we actually do have more power to overcome that default feeling to give up or to be miserable or to tell ourselves that we can't do it, and choose to be happy and choose to just keep going and get to the end. And it's something that I've just really learned about what it means to be human, and like that's been a huge eye opener for me.
Yeah, huge, huge one. Can I say, Rob, and I've been very open on the show about this, about my own anxiety and battles with depression on and off for years in my adult life. And what you're talking about there with positive mindset, it's sort of really stark for me because there is an ability and I know this from when I've had my darkest points of, it takes a lot sometimes from within me to remind myself that I can try to get that positive mindset back and to shift. And sometimes it even comes to language. I know I've talked about it before as well, in terms of doing something that might be a bit challenging or scary, and even the words we use in language. Is it challenging or scary, or is it exciting? An opportunity. So there's lots of stuff that rings true for me there. I'm not saying that it's possible for me, certainly 100% of the time when I'm feeling down, to be able to shift, and it's definitely not a case where you can just tell someone, come on, buck up and be happy, because that's not what you're talking about here. But that life lesson of giving yourself starkly the knowledge of the perception and the mindset that you're taking will help you towards the outcome. I really love that as a life lesson that you've got from this journey. And again, not one that you necessarily knew you were going to get when you signed up and set off.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make such a good point. I'm not at all saying that we should just dismiss mental health difficulties and just say like, oh, just get a grip and go on. Like, that's not at all. It's the opposite. I've gone through really dark periods and really felt powerless to deal with those things, and I really get how it feels just the weight of being alive being so intense that it's like a physical weight on your shoulders, and that's really hard. I guess what this journey sort of gave to me was that realization that it's not completely out of my control how I feel, and by and like this is different for everyone, but like I found ways that I could counteract that tendency to feeling miserable, and instead saying, Rob, I'm not going to allow you to do that. We're going to be happy today. We're going to find something joyful. And even like speaking that out loud to myself over and over again. And sometimes it was like, Rob, just get over yourself. Rob, just get over yourself. Like, this is awesome. Like sometimes just like saying that could be the start of like forcing myself into a positive mindset. And that was something that I sort of had almost given up on before. And as I said earlier on in the podcast, as difficult as and crazy as this journey was, like it was the best my mental health has been for years. And I think there's really something to be said for that, just that simplicity in life. And like, that's not necessarily a choice that can be made or is sustainable in the long run. But I think just taking time out to just escape the bubble of where I was before and just learn to be happy being by myself. I think we live in a culture where we're terrified of just being alone with our own thoughts, and we just need to be stimulated all the time in order to just avoid, being by yourself without a screen and your own thoughts. And I think being faced by that and just having hours and hours of just me and my own thoughts, and just learning to be happy in my own skin without other people and without having to have crutches was, another really, really great thing that I've taken away. And I have to keep reminding myself about that. It's so easy to just slip back into things before, but I think there are just like so many things we can learn for life from our experiences and reminding ourselves of them. And even doing this podcast is like really like just, and saying these things out loud, it just really reminded me like how important it is to hold on to these.
You know how I've been talking about, I've gone through your Instagram, I've trawled through all your old stories. I think before we press record, you were sort of saying, your phone's bombarding you with memories of 1 year ago you were here, and it takes you right back. And I think you've been mentioning, you're taking the time to write that down, to remind yourself of what you've done. If people want to follow this journey and find out what you've done and learn about it in more detail, then this extremely insane episode. Listeners, you're either listening to this in one huge episode or I've magically found a way to whittle it correctly into two. But either way, power to you, because Rob's story is amazing, and how could I let up the opportunity to hear more of your stories? How can other people find out more about you and this journey?
So I set out with this just planning to try and document it very ad hoc for myself and for my friends, just like close friends from home. And so I ended up sort of having this sort of Instagram page, Rob on the Road, that was just my sort of small travel account that ended up sort of posting quite a lot more stuff up and getting a bit more of a following. So that's where I tried to post stuff as I went along. But to be honest, I didn't really have the time or energy to properly document everything that happened as I went along. And I think when you spend 6 to 8 to 10 hours on a bike in the saddle and like dealing with all the various logistical challenges that you come, once you've found food, washed, you're lying down, like the last thing you want to do is spend an hour editing videos. And so I've definitely not put out as much content as I hoped. And I also really wanted to avoid sort of trying to become a sort of bikepacking influencer and almost allowing myself to think about every experience as what content can I make from this. And so the content I put out was quite sporadic. I tried to write down every day what I did, how I felt, and actually put that on my Strava, just because it was the convenient place to put it. And over the next couple of months, I am planning to sort of go back through everything I wrote, all the pictures I took, and write up my journey and my experiences as a series of blog posts. I can't guarantee how far through those will be when this comes out, but I definitely want to sort of write it up in a way that I'm proud of and sort of tells my story, and also is a way for me to look back through everything I did and process it, because at the time, every day there's new challenges, there's new crazy shit that happens. And when the next day you have even more crazy shit to deal with, you don't necessarily have the time or capacity to process what's just happened. And so I'm really looking forward to going back through the whole journey sort of day by day and writing it up and processing it and reliving how that felt emotionally at the time and talking about how I now feel emotionally looking back on it with everything that I've been through since.
I'm excited for it, Rob, and I'm so glad you're taking the time to do that now. And like you said, I think it was really important to make the decision at the time to just I guess it's cliche to say be in the moment, but to be in the experience as opposed to how do I want to document the experience and not have the weight of having to document it in the moment as well. As someone who's taken trips and taken videos and of journeys, and I've got to say I haven't got the time to put all of the stuff that I would like to put out together because it's just everywhere. These podcast episodes take a while to edit, let alone my own videos. Yeah. All to say, listeners, I will provide a link in the show notes to the way that you can follow along Rob, and hopefully we can see more descriptive details in those journal notes as well, Rob, because I think the way that you tell a story, it's clear that you were in the moment at the time. I don't think you could do it if you were trying to describe it behind the lens of a camera. And gosh, could you imagine how much longer it would have taken you if you'd still had your drone with you? You'd have some dreamy drone shots, but you'd have hours of the day lining up the shots and getting the content too.
Well, this is the thing is like from a purely practical perspective, I just didn't have the time to spend take days off to spend video editing and even just like doing photos and writing things up and making Instagram content. And so you can sort of actually tell from my Instagram how I sort of drop off.
You do, and you're like, back again, here's a recap.
Yeah, and then I'm like, I'm back now, and then I sort of disappear for a month.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why I want to sort of write it all up properly in a way that I'm proud of. But yeah, I think it was a conscious choice to try and experience it as it was and then reflect on it rather than make the trip about the content. And I completely respect people who do that. And for many people, it's the way that trip gets funded is by the content they're making and the sponsors. And that would be a really cool thing to do in the future. But, this was my first time doing a trip. I was doing it for myself. I was doing it to raise money. And it was just a really cool thing to experience. I didn't want to sort of get sucked into thinking about what I was making and how that was perceived by strangers. So yeah, I guess that's sort of how I feel about content and creation and documenting stuff. But I always find it fascinating how even mundane details for me, because that was just what daily life looked like, are so fascinating to someone who didn't go on that journey. And of course, and like that's the case. And that's how I would feel if I asked people about their like journeys that are completely different to what I've experienced.
Hi listeners, I want to take a quick moment to talk about an awesome way that you can support me out here on Seek Travel Ride, as well as gear up for your next bike adventure. Now, if you've been dreaming about taking your bike travel setup to the next level, you need to check out our show supporters, Old Man Mountain. Their racks are the real deal, they're rugged, they're versatile, and they're ready to take on any adventure, no matter what bike you're riding or which roads or trails you're going to be riding on. But here's the best part. By clicking our bespoke link, which is oldmanmountain.com/seek travel ride, you're letting Old Man Mountain know that you heard about them right here on the Seek Travel Ride podcast. It's a great way to show your support for the show while discovering gear that's been trusted by adventurers all around the world. So hit pause, or don't, multitasking for the win, right? And head to that link. I've provided it in the show notes, so it's nice and easy for you. That's oldmanmountain.com/seek travel ride. Let's keep the adventure rolling together and let's get back to the episode. It's also a reflection of what became your normal as the journey evolved as well. Like the things that would stick out to people hearing about it for the first time possibly would have to you, but, maybe by day 100, it was, of course, this is normal life now.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool too, because again, it's a sign that you're sort of within the experience and properly immersed there. All right, Rob, it's time to bring the show to a close. I have 3 quick questions which I ask to finish it up, and I ask all my guests. The first one's music related, and I know that we spoke before we recorded that, music or podcast and listening to something actually did get you through a lot of this trip. As a guest of the show, you get to pick a song that now goes on the Seek Travel Ride playlist. Each song on this playlist has been chosen by a guest, and it's the song they've picked to be the soundtrack to their adventure. What song are you going to choose?
I'm going to pick Arnold Palmer by Jeb Bush Orchestra, which is this amazing song I discovered on my Discover Weekly pretty early on in the trip while I was cycling through Morocco. And that song has just been, that is the soundtrack to my trip. That song I put on when I was feeling miserable because I couldn't help but feel happily listening to that. And if you listen to it, it's going to make you feel happy. Just that trumpet melody, that key solo, that ending, it's just pure joy. And I remember the first time listening to it, cycling down, and it was the day after I had this horrendous food poisoning in Morocco. And I was cycling down to the coast to find a camp spot, watching the sunset, winding down these roads and just listening to this like joyful song and just thinking, this is what I'm here for. So that's my contribution to the soundtrack.
I love it. It's such an eclectic soundtrack. Listeners, you can find it there on Spotify or Apple Music, the Seek Travel Ride playlist. Over 5 hours long now, Rob, so it's there for a long day of travel for your next adventure.
I'll check it out for sure.
All right, next question. You have a choice one day, Rob. You can choose to ride in one direction and you'll be riding forever over the most roughest corrugated roads you could imagine. So I'm thinking you're in Namibia. Yeah. Or your other choice is you can choose to ride forever into a block headwind. Which one are you going to choose?
That's a really difficult decision. I choose the corrugated road because cycling into a headwind is the most demoralizing experience that a bikepacker can have. There is nothing worse than the feeling of having something physically pushing you back. It's worse than climbing a hill. It's worse than corrugated gravel roads to the desert. And yeah, some of those headwinds are the worst. I remember reading, I think my main sort of preparation for understanding what bikepacking would be before the trip was reading a 10-point article on one of these random blogs saying 10 things I learned as a bikepacker. And the one that stuck with me was the devil is real and he manifests himself as a strong headwind.
Oh,
and, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That I could attest that is completely true. And like, yeah, I'm not going to swear on this podcast, but I just remember like the most infuriating and the most obscene language that came out of my mouth was whenever I was like cycling for hours and hours and days into intensely strong headwinds. That just being so tough.
Yeah, and I think the toughness is a physical element of like you physically have to push hard and you're not getting like the pay, you're not getting the mileage that you expect you should for that effort. There's such a mental side to it, isn't it? Because I guess the corrugations, it's a physical thing, isn't it? But you're sort of picking your way through. Corrugations with a headwind, there, oh man, you need to pay penance there. Yeah. You're in purgatory.
Yeah. No human should have to experience. We'll not wish that on my worst enemy.
No, okay. All right. Rob, final question. It's a relatively new one, and listeners, I'm really liking that I've changed this up actually, and I'm enjoying the answers I'm getting. I want you to finish this sentence for me, and it is, the best thing about taking a bike adventure is...
Best thing about taking a bike adventure is the freedom of being in control of your own journey, being on your own pedal power, and just being forced to pedal every mile of the journey wherever you go. And that intimacy with the environment and just having to travel through on your own power wherever you're going, rather than just, scoot from highlight point to highlight point. That's the best part.
I absolutely love that answer, Rob. It really sums up what I've said a few times already, in that it's the immersive experience that it gives you traveling slowly through that landscape. And it certainly has come front and center for me that was what this journey for you was about. Rob MacLennan, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. Like, I was just thinking, I'm so glad that you just had that random thought one night. I wonder if I can cycle from London to Cape Town.
Yeah.
And even more glad that you actually said that you were going to do it out loud to a friend who doubted you, and then you doubled down to it.
Yeah.
Because I think, had you not done that, who knows, would you have taken this journey? And just think of all these experiences that you've had and, as you said, have changed you and will forever shape how you perceive each day now. You've given yourself the gift of self-assuredness to know that you will always find a way. And I think that's a big lesson. And something else that came out overwhelmingly, and you said this before we pressed record, is so many people could zero in and focus on the things that didn't go so well. But for every one of those moments, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of counterpoints to say this was an overwhelmingly positive experience. All is to say, I am so stoked. This has been such a long recording session. There's no way I could cut it down. Thank you so, so much for sharing your stories and experiences here on the podcast for us at Seek Travel Ride.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this.
Well, listeners, that's a wrap on this incredible 2-part episode with Rob MacLennan. I hope you enjoyed listening to Rob share his incredible story. Something that really struck me was how taking on a challenging journey like this gave Rob such invaluable life lessons. To hear him recall how, despite the struggles he faced, he managed to use it always as an opportunity to shift his perspective, and how it was by doing that he can now reflect back on a period of time which was the best his mental health has ever been. What a real gift. Now, I genuinely could have kept talking to Rob for hours on end when we caught up, and I'd certainly not rule out another session with him in the future, because I know so well there were many adventure stories and experiences that we weren't even able to touch on. I hope that you've enjoyed what we shared with you over these 2 parts, and who knows, maybe it's given you a touch of inspiration for your own trip through Africa. Now, listeners, this episode is also the final one for 2024. Wow! What an incredible year it's been for me, sharing these stories of adventure from my guests to all of you all the way around the world. Do you know the podcast is listened to in over 170 countries? That statistic blows my mind, and I'm forever wondering when I look at a global map how many people are taking bike adventures while they're tuning into the show. 2024 was also a year where I launched our midweek mini episodes as a way of sharing more listener stories with all of you. I also celebrated releasing episode 100 just a number of weeks ago, which is a truly incredible milestone, which is still blowing my mind right now. But I think one of the best things about producing this show has been hearing from you, the listener, and learning how tuning in to Seek Travel Ride has given you the inspiration to take your own bike adventures. Whether that adventure has been a long weekend, a week away, a month, or perhaps even the beginning of a multi-year journey, what I've learnt is that the experiences we're getting from taking these types of journeys on stick with us forever. I'm looking forward to continuing to share the adventure stories as we cross over into 2025, as well as seeing this incredible Seek Travel Ride global community continue to grow, as you help me show everyone out there that if you love bike adventures and bike travel, then Seek Travel Ride is the #1 podcast for you to tune into. Now, if you've gotten value out of listening to these episodes, and if you'd like to show your appreciation for the content I'm producing, you can, of course, support the show by clicking the Buy Me a Coffee link, which I have included in the show notes. I truly appreciate the support from you, my super fans, and I love hearing your messages as well. I'd like to take the time now to also wish you all an incredibly happy new year. Here's to a 2025 that's filled with bike adventures, and until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.